built-ins can be tricky to get just right. So in this video, I'll show you step by step how I construct and install built-ins, how to build fully assembled pre-finished face frames, integrated CAD storage, and show you 3 different ways to scribe when working between 2 walls that most beginners struggle with. I'll show you a trade secret no one else does for perfect drawer reveals, how to properly calculate rails and stiles for drawer fronts, the reason I don't build drawers for built-ins and why you shouldn't either. I'll even throw in some motion-activated LEDs. Why did I do it this way? And what I would do differently. So here is the space we are working with. A little alcove nook with a couple of windows. Now I asked my buddy Kevin from Fine Point Cabinetry to create some detailed 2D elevations for this one because I tend to work more efficiently with measured drawings as a starting point. It also helps me calculate materials. And Shopcat Jerry was in full assistance mode as usual. Okay, for this project, I bought 1 sheet of pre-finished plywood and 1 sheet of unfinished. These are 4x8 maple 3/4 inch. First up, I'm going to get the toe kick built, which is what the window seat will sit on. And then we'll start cutting the parts for the window seat. And this assembly should go pretty quick. Should. And in retrospect, the only real reason I needed the pre-finished plywood was for the storage cubby that will live behind the small bookcase and will be accessed with an integrated flip-up lid. So, in retrospect, I could have just bought unfinished plywood and hit those areas with a couple of quick coats of finish. And that is one of the many post-mortem Monday morning quarterback should have done this, why'd you do it that way? Head scratchers on this project. Now breaking down these sheets of plywood into the parts for the toe kick as well as the window seat cabinet assembly went rather quickly with my shop drawings to refer to. I even made myself a fancy little cut list diagram so I could revel in the satisfaction of checking each part off the list as I cut them.
What is this? River table? Stroke me. Nice. Nice. I wish I could whistle. I'd whistle get your ass over here and stroke me again. Oh, I've heard it. He hasn't noticed. Ha! Got him.
Now my original plan for the top of the window seat was to use plywood, cut out the lid, hardwood edge the front to make it look thick, and then paint it to match the color of everything else. However, somebody didn't like that idea. So we will have to revisit that later. But for now, I wanted to get everything labeled, and we still had a few more parts to cut. Okay, so here is the toe kick. You can see we have 2-inch frame all the way around, and then a piece of 3-inch wide on the top and 2 4-inch on the bottom. Let's build it. Now, since these pieces were cut from the pre-finished plywood sheet, I'm not using any glue here because, well, it won't stick. Just some brad nails to hold it together. It's the glue on the top and the bottom stretchers that really lock this thing together. A great way to secure multiple panels together in a cabinet box like this is to cut notches in the front and back of the dividers so that the stretchers sit down flush. And boy, do I regret not using the dado stack for this operation. Now back to my earlier point where I really didn't need a sheet of pre-finished plywood. I could have just applied finish to the areas I needed. Here's some more evidence to support that statement. That UV coating is kind of stubborn. Now I'm working off the middle of my cabinet box here, rather than one end or the other. That's because all the dimensions drawn up for the plans were using 3/4 inch plywood. However, 3/4 inch plywood isn't really 3/4 inch. So if I'd worked from one end to the other with my measurements, eventually things would have been out of position slightly. And I really needed that center bookcase section perfectly centered on the window seat. Now I could work outwardly in both directions and start securing my dividing panels. Now I'm just using screws here, no glue. This thing will be plenty strong enough once those stretchers go in, it's secured to the wall, and those face frames go on. Isn't that right, Jerry? Now, because my face frame is going to overhang the interior dividers, I need to pad out those dividers so that the drawer runners will be flush with the face frame. And the reason I didn't just put one single piece across the bottom is I wanted support for when I drop those front and back stretchers in. All right, now this thing is starting to take shape. But there was also the matter of the back nailer strips, so I can actually screw this thing to the wall. I was a little short on plywood, so some scrap maple did the trick. Okay, made a slight little boo-boo here, because if you remember I mentioned in the intro that I was going to show you multiple ways on scribing filler strips, and in order to do that, I need to put a groove down the front edge of this left end panel. So luckily, I only screwed everything together with no nails or glue. So I'm gonna take this panel off and cut a groove down the front edge on the table saw, which will be just the right width for a number 20 wooden biscuit. So I wanna get this slot cut, and then we'll get to the scribing process later. So I've set the blade height to just deeper than half the width of a biscuit. Now, since my end stiles will be perfectly flush with the inside of the cabinet box, I'm going to leave my fence in the position where it is and run a groove down that face that is closest to that inside edge. Now, if you wanted a 1/4 inch overhang, what you would do is you would kick the fence that way, 1/4 of an inch, and make that groove. Now, this really needs to be done with a full kerf 1/8 inch blade in order to match the thickness of a biscuit. So if we were to attach this as it stands now, that would be flush. But now we want to create a scribing groove that will allow us to scribe this in place, make the cut, and then move it back over to our original groove to give us the perfect position. So I'm going to move my fence over 1/2 of an inch and make a parallel groove with the first, making sure that the same reference edge is against the fence. So now we have 2 parallel slots 1/2 of an inch apart. The groove we just cut will be our scribing groove that we'll use to mark our scribe. Then we'll cut that, and then we'll move our biscuits over into our final groove. We'll have a perfect scribe against the wall, and we will have perfect position on our case. Now, this is going to be scribing method 1 that I will demonstrate. We'll call this the offset biscuit method. Now, this is perfect if you do not have a biscuit joiner and do not want to buy one, but you want to use this method. All you'd have to do is buy some cheap biscuits and use your table saw. And if you don't want to deal with biscuits at all, you can just rip your own splines and either cut them in pieces or the full length. There's one more thing I forgot to do before cutting these pieces and assembling, so let's get out the edge banding. These need to be edge banded because when you lift that integrated lid, some of these edges will be visible. The back panel of that cubby needs to be edge banded as well, so I'll do that before I install it. Now, the other offset scribing method I'm going to show you involves using the Lamello Zeta P2 and the P14 connectors, the Tenso, and the Bisco alignment aid. Now, the theory here is the same. I'm going to create 2 rows of parallel slots in my end style and corresponding slots in my case side. Now, the way I make sure that these slots are offset the correct amount is I'm going to use my stop square fence that comes with the machine. I'm going to set this to 30 millimeters. Then I'm going to slide on this block that I developed called the scribe fence, which has exactly a 20 millimeter distance, which slides onto the fence with a little click. So with this block in place, I will cut my first row of slots, first in the case side and then in my end style. Then I remove this block, then I will make a second row of slots in my end style, so those will be exactly 20 millimeters apart. And then when I'm scribing, I use this little magnetic block, which comes on the jig, that is exactly 20 millimeters thick. And since there are embedded magnets in this block, my flat back marking knife sticks right to it. Then I can run my scribe all the way down, make that cut, move this over into my first row of slots, just like with the biscuit method. Same result. A perfect scribe, and my style is perfectly flush with my case. Now we can use our Bisco alignment aids just to double check. And use that outermost row of slots. Now we're flush here and here. It's a fingernail off here. That's because this piece of plywood is a little bowed, but that won't affect anything. And here is the side that we put biscuits in. 2 rows of slots. And that's flush as well. Now, since the inside of this case will never be seen because there'll be a drawer here, I've gone ahead and drilled these access holes to use the Lamello Clamex connectors, which have these little cam locks, which give about 200 pounds of clamping pressure. What this is going to allow me to do is put my end stiles securely in place while I cut all my remaining face frame parts, top rail, bottom rail, and all the intermediate stiles. Now it's all about relative dimensioning here. I'm just going to lay this on here, mark, cut, and fit. And with that first piece cut, it was all about doing my layout lines on the rest of my case, cutting all of those slots, and then making all the corresponding layout marks on my face frame material and cutting those slots. Now I'm also drilling access holes for more Clamex connectors across the top. And then it was time to dry fit everything together. Oops, almost forgot about those center dividers. Those are going to need Lamello slots as well. And that is the final dry fit piece. We can flip this thing over and see how it looks. Now at this point, while the face frame was dry fit in place, I took measurements of the rough openings for the drawer fronts and the drawer boxes so I could get those in motion. This was also a good time to drill all the pocket holes in all of my pieces. But I can't glue this whole thing up yet because remember, we still have to scribe our end stiles to the walls. Now I don't have a really good reason for installing LED lighting in this window seat, except I think it's kind of cool, maybe a little gimmicky, but I like it. So these are actually motion activated. So I'm going to line them in the bookcase in the front, and they will also light up the drawers when you open them. And if for some reason I don't want them anymore, I'll just unplug it. Now these are actually pretty cool because there's multiple LED light bars that I can affix 2 in each section, and they all get daisy chained together. A lot of parts here. Oh gosh. Now before I did any installation, I wanted to make sure these things worked. So here we go. Oh, that was kind of anticlimactic. Hopefully they're brighter when they're in place. Now, the way these LED light bars work is they're kind of angled down at a 45-degree angle. So I had to install a couple of backer blocks across those front stretchers so that they angled down correctly into the drawers. And drill a bunch of wire fishing holes, install the clips, try to get all these wires somewhat neatly organized using the enclosed wire keeper downer clip things. And then one last thing to do before I slid this thing into place was to prime the bookcase section. And then, of course, do the demo work of the windowsill, the bottom trim. Oh, yeah, and move that outlet. That was a real joy. Put the insulation back, little drywall work, little help from Jerry, of course. Oh, and the mud and tape, which, by the way, this did not have to look good at all because it's going to get completely covered, but I did want it to be sealed up. And now we could drop in the toe kick. The leveling process was pretty straightforward. I like to use these plastic shims, which are different thicknesses. You can buy metric or imperial. And then I'm just screwing on these little wooden feet to make sure everything stays in place. I don't think those plastic shims will ever compress, but a little insurance doesn't hurt. And now we could slide the window seat cabinet in place and secure it to the toe kick as well as the wall. And to give that face frame a little more support, I'm adding these filler strips on the ends. And now we can start scribing our end stiles using 3 different methods. First thing we want to do with our biscuit scribe is to put a piece of tape down the full length. Now we want to put our biscuits on the innermost slot. That is our scribe slot. Now we can put it in the slot that we cut on the case side. Now, since these slots were cut a 1/2 inch apart, I'm going to take my flat back marking knife and use these mag shims by Fast Cap. They are in 1/8 inch blocks, so I'm going to take 4 of them. They are magnetic, so marking knife sticks right to them. And then I will just run down the contour of the wall here. Easier for me to start from the bottom and go up. Now we can just remove that tape and reveal our scribe line. Now for this side, same principle applies, but we're using the lamello method. So I'm going to put my biscos in the innermost slot. And since we use my scribe fence that has a 20mm offset, I'm going to use the 20mm scribe block with the embedded magnets and make the scribe. Now we can remove that, and that is our scribe line.
I like to back bevel these cuts to about 10 degrees. That way you're not removing as much material as you zero in on your layout line. I cut the left and the right stile as close to my layout line as I could, and then tidy it all up with a block plane and some sandpaper.
Okay, now we can put our biscuits in, check the fit. Remember, this is in the outermost row of slots now. That's not bad. All right, now we can check the lamello side. Pop our biscos back in. That's not bad. All right, I mentioned a third way to scribe filler strips in your end stiles. Now this one doesn't require any lamellos, biscuits, or slots cut. So what I have here is an oversized stile, and in this case I want it flush with my case side. So what I want to do is make a scribe block. Now the thickness of this can be an arbitrary measurement. This one is about 5/8 of an inch. Now I've also embedded a couple of magnets in the back, which you don't have to do, but it's just easier to hold a marking knife. And then I've created 2 blocks the same thickness as my scribe block. And all I'm going to do is take a couple of dabs of CA glue. You don't need a lot here. It's just to tack it. And I'm going to tack it flush with the outside edge here. In this case, I'm going to do 2 blocks. It's just a little bit easier. Now, best practice here is to use a wood that is softer than you're affixing to. That way you can just bang it off, and if it leaves any residue, you can sand that off. Now what I can do is turn this around and push this up against here. These blocks push up against the inside of my case. Now I can take my spacer block, attach my marking knife, make my scribe all the way down, pop these blocks off, cut that scribe, come back, glue, nail this in place, fill the nail holes, and paint it. Now, if you wanted this to overhang your cabinet by 1/4 of an inch, say, then what you want to do is make your blocks that you attach to it 1/4 of an inch bigger than your scribe block, or whatever distance you want that to be. So this method's a little more down and dirty because you're nailing, filling nail holes, and priming and painting in place. But a lot of times, that's all you need to do.
Now we can finally get this face frame glued up. I use green tape for my layout lines rather than pencil. I'm not really sure why though, but I think it's because sometimes excessive glue squeeze out can cover up your layout lines, and when you wipe it away, it washes away the pencil, and then you don't know where the heck you are, and the glue is drying, and you go into full panic mode. Well, not this time. Anyway, let's cut some drawer front parts. Now these drawer fronts will be frame and panel, shaker style, with a nice bevel detail that I'll show you in a minute. And typically, when I make face frames, doors, and drawer fronts, I like to make them thicker than 3/4 of an inch. usually 7/8. I feel that extra thickness gives it a more substantial feel and definitely a more custom look. It does, however, mean that I have to buy 5/4 material and mill it down, which is a little extra cost and a little extra time.
Okay, if you're interested in how I size my parts for my drawer fronts when using a cope and stick like this, here it is. Now please forgive the crudity of this drawing as it's not to scale. But my rough opening, 24 5/8 by 13 7/8. My rails and stiles are 2 3/8 wide. Typically I go 2 1/8, 2 1/4, but since this profile comes out kind of far, it's not a typical flat panel shaker, this part of the rail and stile gets a little bit smaller. So that's why I made this a little bit bigger than I usually do. Now the stiles are pretty cut and dry. 2 3/8 wide. I like a 3/32 gap, top and bottom. So I'm going to deduct 3/16 of an inch from that to get the length of my stiles. However, I will leave those a little bit long just in case things aren't flush here and I want to trim all the way across. So I will probably make those 13 3/4. Now for the rails, this is where people get tripped up when using a cope and stick bit on the router table. You can't just take this overall dimension and subtract the width of the two stiles because you will be short. Now the reason for that is, here is our rail sliding into our stile. You can see if I were to draw a straight line here, that's the amount that is going into our corresponding stile. So we need to add that distance, which is 3/8 of an inch. It's usually pretty standard no matter what profile you use on a cope and stick bit. So what I need to do is take this overall dimension, subtract 2 3/8, subtract 2 3/8, and then add back 3/4 of an inch because I need 3/8 extra on each side. So that gives me 20 5/8 is the length of my rails. But I need to subtract a little bit for the reveals. So I'm actually going to make those 20 9/16. So these are the lengths of my stiles and my rails, and I need 4 of each.
And I make quick work of those on the miter saw with a stop block, and be sure to cut at least 1 extra rail and stile for setup, or at least have scrap that is the exact same thickness. Now here's the rail and stile or cope and stick bit set that I'm using from Whiteside. It didn't take long to get the bit set up, do some test cuts, and get a nice clean fit. Now I'm using a coping sled here to cut all of my copes first in the ends of my rails, or the horizontal pieces. And always, always use a sacrificial piece to back up your pieces to prevent any tear out, because it can get pretty nasty with these bits. And a coping sled is a great way to secure your work pieces and keep your hands away from that flesh-seeking router bit. There aren't many tools that turn my backside into a diamond maker, but aside from a chainsaw, the router table sits atop the list. So be safe out there, people. Now with all my cope cuts done in the rails, I could move over to my other router table and cut the corresponding stick or groove profile in the stiles and in the rails as well. The groove being cut will house the panel, which I will make out of 1/2-inch MDF. MDF is a much smoother surface than plywood for painting and won't expand and contract like solid wood. With my panels cut to size, I switched to a dado stack to cut a 1/4-inch deep rabbet on the back side of each panel. This will allow the panel to be on the same plane as the inside of the rails and stiles, and therefore flush against the drawer boxes when installed. If I used a 1/4-inch MDF panel, there would be a gap that would need to be filled to provide adequate support when attaching the drawer pulls. Now the panel is slightly undersized, and you see that little shadow line gap all the way around. That gives you a little fudge factor to center the panel. And then everyone's favorite, the glue up. Well, just stage 1 of this glue up. You see, there was still the matter of priming the MDF panel before gluing the drawer fronts up as a unit. And the best way to get a head start on the glue up without installing the panel is just gluing up 3 sides together, and the other side serves as a dummy fit spacer to make sure the other corners are glued up square. Now for the primer. Now I'm a Benjamin Moore guy. I've had great success with it over the years, and this new Insulex Sticks primer, whew, man, this stuff dries really fast, and you can get it tinted to match your final top coat color. Unfortunately, I ended up going with a darker top coat color, so the underbase primer didn't match exact, but hey, it's darker than white. And since those dried so fast, by the time I was done priming them, the glue had set up enough on the drawer fronts that I could drop in the panel and do the final glue up. Now it did get a little squeeze out in those corners, so a little paintbrush just lifts that out and cleans it up nice. And now, with a little help from Lola, we can check the fit of our drawer fronts and our openings. Now these usually aren't perfectly square, the openings I mean, so there is some adjustments that have to be made. As I mentioned earlier, 3/32 is the gap I like going all the way around, so I cut some spacers. Line those on the bottom, and I'm going to get this centered left to right with an equal gap. So now when I move this up there, that fits there, but doesn't fit there. So I'm going to take this spacer and draw a line there. So I'm going to want to cut from that line to 0 across the top. And now, keeping this in the same position, I'm going to butt my spacer up against my face frame, draw a line there, and at the top, and do it on the other side as well. Then I can cut to those lines, and it will give me an equal space all the way around. Now, the reason I'm centering this panel left to right and then marking my cuts is I don't want to push it all the way to one side and take a bunch of material off one style because your eye will pick up on the different widths. I also cut just shy of all of my layout lines. That way, when I come back with a hand plane to remove the saw marks, it'll take off just that last amount of material. I use the same exact method for both drawer fronts, and then I can do a final check of fit, which looks good. Now there's one thing left to do before I start priming and painting, and that is to put a little 1/16 round over on all edges just to break that sharp edge. You can do this with sandpaper, but this 1/16 inch bit is much faster and will give you more consistent results. I needed to do the same thing to the face frame. However, on the bottom edge of that center portion where the bookcase is, I'm putting a chamfer on the inside. I then clean that up with a chisel, just forgot to film it. This will create a natural break between the face frame and the cabinet, just in case they're off a little bit. Because with pre-finished material like this is going to be, if it's off just a hair, you can't go back and sand it. So adding that chamfer just gives a nice intentional detail where those two surfaces meet. I'm using the Graco Quick Shot, which is the first time I've used this sprayer. I like it, but there's still a lot of figuring out to do for me. And then the final top coat, Benjamin Moore Advance in Hail Navy. I'm going to end up putting 2 coats of this on here, waiting 24 hours between coats. If you recall from earlier, Jerry didn't like the idea of a painted top for this window seat and thought I should go with walnut or white oak. Well, as you can see, I went with walnut, mostly because I had some sitting on the lumber rack and didn't feel like forking out the cash for white oak. However, I'm still not sold on that decision. Now, the great thing about using planks instead of plywood is it's easier to break out the integrated lid and have a run of continuous grain. Now, once the top was dry and sanded up to 150, the finishing process could begin. Now, this is a UV-cured hard wax oiled finish called Heidelberg Pro Lignum. You've probably seen me use this before. Now, I like to mix my own custom batch of 3 parts ultra matte to 1 part semi-gloss. I'm not totally sold on the durability of this product for high traffic areas. You certainly can't beat the speed of curing it, but I think Rubio Monocoat is highly superior when it comes to durability and scratch resistance. The cure time of 7 days is really the only downside of Rubio. Now, for a client piece, I would only use this UV finish if I was going to seal it with some kind of a ceramic coating. Now, once the face frame was dry, I could remove my masking and preload all of my lamello connectors in the face frame as well as in the cabinet boxes. Then it was glue and the moment of truth. Is this thing going to fit? Well, I mean, it should, right? Now, because these walls had a severe taper inwards, that initial push getting past the corners was a little bit difficult, but once it got past there, it was the extremely satisfying part of snapping those tensos and turning those cam clamps on the Clamex connectors to tighten everything down, and now to inspect the scribes. Now, obviously, I had some paint rub off, but those scribes look nice and tight on both sides. The lamello scribe and the biscuit scribe both produced identical results. Now, on to the drawer boxes. Now, I stopped making my own custom dovetail drawer boxes for built-ins and cabinetry years ago, and here's why. These drawer boxes are almost 12 inches high, 24 inches wide, 18 inches deep. So at almost 12 inches high, you can't use a 1x12, so you have to use a 1x8, two of them glued up. So if you think of all the maple material involved here, you would need two 1x8x8, but you need a little waste in there, so let's just say two 1x8x10 footers at $8 a linear foot. That's $160 just in maple. Now, nowhere around me can you buy 5/8 inch maple, so you have to buy 3/4 and mill it down. So once it's milled down, then you have to glue these blanks up. Then you have to set up your dovetail jig, do some test pieces, run all these joints, glue them up, scrape away the glue, sand everything nice and flush, finish it, sand it, finish it, sand it. Oh, I forgot about the drawer bottoms. This is 3/8 plywood, which is difficult to get, so either you got to go with 1/2 inch or 1/4. And if you buy just the handy panels, let's say at Home Depot, you're looking at two at $25 a piece. So that's $50 plus the $160 for the maple. You're at $210 in materials already, no labor. And when you calculate in all the labor for milling, joinery, gluing up, sanding, and finishing, it's probably an 8-hour day. So at a minimum $50 an hour, okay? That's $400 in labor plus $210 in material to make two drawers. I paid $230. Now, I get mine from Timbercraft Drawers in New Milford, Connecticut. They do ship. You don't have to be local. And if you mention my name, you should get a discount. So order your drawers or drawers, or drawers. Now let's go install these. The 18-inch undermount slides I'm using are Silice Progressa Smooth. Now, for inset applications like this, the slides need to be set back from the inside of the face frame, and I usually start with 4 millimeters. I use the slotted holes on the slides just in case I need to make any adjustments before putting in the rest of the screws in the standard round holes. And now for my least favorite part, making the template for the top. Now, this is just 1/8 of an inch underlayment from Home Depot, and I basically cut the small strips into 3 or 4 inches wide and then scribe those individually and glue them all up into one giant template using CA glue, or you can use hot glue. You just want to make sure it's held together very well, so when you lift it, it doesn't snap or deform on you. Now, I usually lay down some painter's tape on my work surface. I can usually see pencil lines much better on yellow tape. Then I lay down the template, trace it out, and, well, sometimes I get interrupted. Now I'm going to back bevel this about 15 degrees. If you remember, I did my stiles about 10, but since this is a lot thicker, I'm going to back bevel it a little bit more. That way when I go to drop this thing in, there isn't a lot of surface area rubbing down the wall. Now, because of the 2 little jogs or notches I need to cut because of the windowsill, I have to do some plunge cuts with the track saw, and then finish up with a handsaw. Not that big of a deal, but just takes a little extra time. And then since these weren't straight lines, I'm just cleaning these up with a chisel and a belt sander, which is the fastest way to remove that material. Now I could also cut that square edge across the front, and I'm putting that little chamfer on it like I did down below in the bookcase unit, so this front nosing will meet the top with a subtle but intentional transition. Now, the reason I need to attach this nosing after the top goes in is because it's 1.5 inches tall. If I were to try to drop the window seat down in the way I'm going to have to do it, it would tear up the wall. So doing it this way and snapping it on with the lamellos eliminates any damage I might cause. Isn't that right, Jerry? Now, before I drop the top on, I did have to finish up all the wiring and running the LED lights and the motion sensor, which is a lot easier to do while the top is off. And now the moment of truth. I was definitely sweating this one out. But with some gentle persuasion with a few whacks of the mallet, things actually looked pretty good. To secure the top, I ran some screws underneath through the stretchers into the top. Now the screws across the back are screwed directly in, but the front ones I had in enlarged holes to allow for expansion and contraction. And now to get that nosing on, I'm using the Tenso P14s, which are the Lamello snap-together connectors. Apply a little glue, get it in place, and then just tap, tap, tap-a-roo right down the line. Done. Satisfaction? 10 out of 10. Now to mount the drawer fronts, I'm using something a little unconventional you may not have seen. It's a 2-part drawer front adjust system by Bloom, which includes this marking template and nylon adjusters, which I'll show you in a minute. But first, I want to show you one of my favorite drawer front mounting tips. Now typically, just the weight of the drawer front alone does not simulate the drawer load that will actually be in the drawer when you use it. So, by placing a kettlebell or similar in the drawer while you mount the front, it will help to simulate a fully loaded drawer, and your reveals will remain the same once mounted and in use. Otherwise, when you mount the drawer front without preloading it, once you actually put something heavy in there, the drawer will drop and your reveals will no longer be even. Now with your reveal shims in place and your drawer front set side to side, give it a couple whacks and that marking template shows you exactly where you need to drill your hole for your mounting screws to the nylon adjusters. And a magnet is the easiest way to remove that metal marking template in case it's a little tight. And here are the nylon adjusters. They are ribbed, so with a few aggressive whacks of the mallet, they are in there to stay. Then you just run some screws from the inside, put up your drawer front, tighten those down, but not all the way, but just tight enough where you can still make adjustments up, down, left, and right with the adjusters. And then the final thing to do was to mount the drawer pulls. I like this little jig by True Position Tools to get my holes in the exact same position on both drawer fronts. And now I could fully secure each drawer front to their respective drawer box. Sometimes with a project like this, you feel like you're almost done, but there's still quite a few details left to finish up, like reinstalling the baseboard trim and shoe molding, and then also cutting the shoe molding for across the front of the window seat, which needed to be coped, painted, and installed.
Oh, why did I do it this way?
And what I mean by that is I decided not to run the baseboard across the front and just do the shoe molding instead, because blue being coped into white just doesn't look quite right. But with just the shoe molding, it's not too bad. But honestly, I wish I had done a traditional cabinet toe kick on this window seat, and all of that blue to white transition would have been hidden under the toe kick, or at least in the shadows. And with a little help from Shaper Origin and some Total Boat Fixo epoxy, I could get this 2-inch brass cup pull by Brusso Hardware installed into the lid with a nice flush fit. Oh, and let's not forget about the hinges that we needed to install. Now, these are just traditional Euro-style cabinet hinges by Salice, but they are half overlay. Even though this is an inset lid, I'm using overlay hinges because, as you can see, there's a lip all the way around that the cabinet box created, making it an overlay door or lid. Well, that's a wrap. Hopefully you picked up a few tips that will help you with your next built-in project, and if not, maybe watch it again. There's no shame in a replay. We'll see you on the next one.